Now, the Europeans have lost their primary source of natural gas from Russia, and what they've been doing to this point is paying about 10 times market price in order to fill up their storage. The problem is that storage is just that, storage. It's not even an emergency supply. It's part of their normal supply system for the winter. So stuff comes in via pipe, and in the summer, demand is lower, and then in the winter, they get about 2/3 of their supply from pipe and about 1/3 from storage. Well, they've lost half of the stuff that used to come in from pipe from the Russians. So they're going to be drawing down more aggressively. And by the time we get to next winter, it's going to be really ugly because the pipes from Russia are in many cases now destroyed. And so they're not going to be able to top off their storage at all without paying absolutely exorbitant prices. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can kind of square the circle here. The first one is bring in natural gas from new sources. Now, the pipes are all maxed out, so that has to be with liquefied form. Normally, natural gas is transported by pipe through fixed infrastructure, but you can, at the point of export, freeze the stuff into a liquid and then load it onto a specialized tanker that then brings it into your consuming zone where it is offloaded and regasified and then funneled back into your system normally. Now, freezing a gas into a liquid form is as energy intensive and as expensive as you might think. The Europeans get around that on the emissions side by pretending that anything that happens with natural gas before it reaches Europe is not their problem, which is, very par for the course when it comes for European data on carbon. And in terms of energy security, unless you sign a fixed term contract that's usually 10 or 20 years, you're tapping what's called the spot market. So just individual cargoes that are looking for a home. Those tend to be far more expensive. And the Europeans don't want to commit to 20 years of natural gas from a source on the other side of the planet. So they're trying to just tap the spot market almost exclusively, and they're having to pay the price for that. And that is part of the reason why European inflation is so much stronger in many cases than it is even in the United States. So that's option one. They've been doing a lot of that. Option number two is to shut down demand. Whether it's demand destruction or purposefully shutting things down doesn't really matter. The Europeans have chosen to largely remove natural gas from their industrial space. And so we are seeing huge amounts of industrial closures across the entire industrial space. And this has a lot of consequences. So the Germans, for example, don't think of energy in the way that most Americans do. We're very agnostic about where we get our energy. So Mexico, Canada, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, if we don't think anyone is looking. The Germans need long-term contracts with state-owned suppliers through fixed infrastructure so they have a degree of stability in their supply. That is not an option right now because a lot of the pipes are offline. So when you shut down industrial infrastructure and demand in Germany, you're talking about something that cuts to the core of their entire industrial model. Because that natural gas isn't just part of their electricity system, it's part of their petrochemical system, which is what makes their manufacturing sector possible. So in shutting all this stuff down, the Europeans are choosing, maybe not consciously, but they are choosing a general deindustrialization trend for the entire continent. No one is making nitrogen-based fertilizer in Europe anymore. No one is smelting aluminum anymore. A lot of the steel foundries are shutting down. Auto manufacturers already down by a quarter and is dropping fast. It'll be gone in less than a year because remember, next year they're going to have even less to work with. So we are looking at the collapse of not just the broader European economic model, but the specific German industrial model that allows things like BMWs to exist. The problem they're facing this winter is that even the normal backup plan of going to the United States for liquefied natural gas is not really an option. As you can see, it's a little chilly here in Colorado. It's chilly in Washington. It is chilly in Texas and Florida. Here it's 4 degrees this morning. And if it's cold in the United States, that means we need incrementally more natural gas in order to keep the heat on. And the only swing energy producer that the United States has in terms of power generation is natural gas. Coal is baseload. It takes too long to spin up and spin down. Same with nuclear for safety reasons. And solar and wind, you can't spin up. You get what the weather gives you, and that's it. Natural gas is our only flexible fuel source. And well, we're being flexible with it by using it right now. And that means it's not available for the Europeans at the moment. Now, for the moment, the Europeans have been very lucky. They're having one of the warmer winters on record, even though the United States is having one of the colder ones. And that means they don't need as much at this moment. But always remember, bottom line, the infrastructure that allowed the Europeans to get to this level of storage and have this degree of supply is no longer there. So next winter is going to be far tougher. And this winter, even with high storage levels and record low temperatures and a lot of demand shut in, this is already the highest electricity and natural gas prices the Europeans have on record. What we're seeing in Ukraine is a potential model for how the United States will fight wars for the next decade or two. One of the many consequences of the 20 years of the global war on terror is that the Americans, for the moment, are pretty much done. We're not going to be deploying troops in number anywhere in the world as a tripwire or as a major force designed to overthrow a government and remake it into whatever image we see fit. It's bloody. The first part, knocking off the government, that's the easy part, but then dealing what happens with the next day, the next month, the next year, the next decade, that sucks. And as we have discovered, with over 100,000 troops and trillions of dollars of investment into Afghanistan and Iraq, we are left with a broken nation and a nation that is, I don't want to call pathologically hostile, but not very fond about the United States about anything. It didn't work. And so the United States needs a different method. And in that method, the Army is no longer an option in terms of ground deployment. We will use the Army if we are faced with a strategic threat. But regardless of what you say about how we did Iraq and Afghanistan, I don't think any of us really thought of the two countries themselves as strategic threats. There may have been elements within them like Al-Qaeda that required getting knocked off. But to say that that required 100,000 troops, no. The 100,000 troops went to try to reshape the local space so that a future strategic threat would not arise. And in that, the war on terror was a failure. So, Ukraine. Here we have a highly motivated country of about 40 million people who is standing up to a nearly as motivated country of roughly 135 to 145 million, Russian numbers, who knows. And all they require is every bullet and drop of fuel that they need to prosecute a war. So what we're seeing is the United States has identified a strategic threat, Russia, and is using a local power to fight the war with American technical and industrial infrastructure. So we provide the equipment, but it's more than that. The technical side of things. The United States has the most sophisticated satellite monitoring system in the world. I'd argue it's better than everyone else's combined by a significant margin, probably a factor of 4 or 5. And we are providing time-on-target information for the Ukrainians to launch artillery and rocket strikes on targets that are miles, tens of miles away, and those rockets and artillery shells are hitting within a few feet of where they're aimed at. You can't do that with just the normal equipment. Even if we didn't have kill switches in all of our